This is the second lecture in our series on design ethics aimed at helping you prepare for the design ethics assignment this year. In this lecture I'm going to talk a little bit about why I think designers should think about ethics in the first place. This is a general introduction and doesn't really go so deep into particular ethical issues, but I'm going to try and explain why I think it's important that designers think about ethics. So one of the reasons I think it's important for designers to think about ethics has to do with the relationship we have with technology as human beings. There is a group that tends to think of technology as making us less than human. However, it's quite hard to argue this. The view that technology makes us less human seems to miss an important point about our evolution. As animals, we're fairly weak, we're not very fast, and our main advantages come from the size of our brains and from our ability to create technology and use it with our opposable thumbs. In a way, we can see ourselves not so much as Homo sapiens, but rather Homo technologicus. We are technological animals, and one of the key reasons we survived is because of this ability to bring technology to be part of us. As designers, we create technologies. We help to design technologies. Interaction designers, user experience designers, visual designers all work to create technologies that we bring into our lives as human beings. These technologies essentially mediate our experience of the world. It's through technology that we understand the world. Technology helps us understand, it allows us to do things, it prevents us from doing other things. Technology can be seen as very much a part of us as human beings. American philosopher Don Ide has suggested that there are 4 ways we can analyse this mediation that technology has on our experience of the world. The first relationship he defines is what is called an embodiment relation. Embodiment relation is where the technology is almost part of our body. It becomes part of us. A simple example of this is wearing glasses. If you wear glasses, eventually you don't realise you're wearing them. You only notice them again once you take them off. At this point, suddenly, the world looks different. But when we wear our glasses, we're not aware of having the glasses on, we're just aware of a world as we experience it. The second relationship is what he calls a hermeneutic relationship. This relationship is where the technology interprets the world for us and allows us to understand. It's not that we actually see the thing, it helps us understand. A good example of this is a thermometer. If we look at the temperature outside, when we're inside, it may tell us it's 5 degrees outside. We don't actually feel that it's 5 degrees, but we understand what this means. The third relationship identified by Ide is what he calls alterity relations. These are where we have a relationship with the technology and the world is almost secondary. For example, people who love their cars have a tendency to focus on the car and not so much on the outside world. Their enjoyment is purely with the relationship with the technology rather than using the technology to experience the world. Another example of this might be someone who spends a lot of time tweaking their computer to make it perfect without actually thinking about what they're going to do with their computer once it is perfect, or having a vague idea of what they're doing it for. The fourth type of relationship is what Ide calls a background relation. A background relation is where we seem to be interacting with the world without technology being there, but in fact the technology is in the background. A good example of this might be air conditioning. We're in a room, the air conditioning is on, and we feel comfortable, but we never think about the fact that there is air conditioning on. The only way we might notice it is if suddenly it stops. We no longer hear that background hum, or we suddenly start to feel uncomfortable in terms of temperature. This is an example of a background relationship. Another example might be when we're using the internet via our mobile phones. In a way, we don't see that we're using the internet. What we see is that we're connecting to websites, and that allows us to do things we want to. Suddenly, if the internet's no longer there, we realise that this technology was in the background helping us achieve our goals. So, technology affects how we can interact with our world. It affects our choices, it affects what we can do, what we believe, etc. So, this means that technology affects how we can act in and on our worlds. If if we look at this, for example, this woman is using a moped, but she's also texting on her mobile phone. This is something that wasn't possible. Technology has given us new possibilities. These new possibilities sometimes enable us to do things, and sometimes they prevent us from doing things. Sometimes this isn't a problem. For example, the technology of the umbrella has allowed us to go outside wearing our nice clothes even when it's raining. And the technology of weather forecasting allows us to work out whether we need to take our umbrella or not. So sometimes technology offers us choices that are not really problematic. In fact, sometimes these choices can be very good and very useful. However, sometimes technology, even if it's unintended, offers us choices that we didn't have before. And these can be difficult choices. The technology of ultrasound allows us to work out the potential sex of a baby, and also to work out when the baby is likely to be born. However, an unintended consequence of this is, together with some other tests, you can work out whether the baby is going to have some sort of hereditary disease, such as Down syndrome. This means that technology, a new technology, has actually created a new choice, a new ethical problem for us as human beings. If the technology wasn't there, we would never have to decide whether to abort the pregnancy or to carry on the pregnancy if the chance of having Down syndrome or some other hereditary disease was high. But now, parents have no other possibility than to choose. They can either choose to take the test and then make a decision based on the test. But even if they choose not to take the test, they have therefore made a decision to go forward with the pregnancy no matter what. These are choices we get given because of technology, and these are problematic choices, and they would not be there unless there was the technology. Sometimes designers and design teams can try to influence the way people act by designing the technology in such a way as to make it easier to do something that the designers and the design team want you to do. This is a Facebook page for the privacy settings. It may be a little bit old, but essentially it's set up in a way that the defaults mean that you share as much as possible with as many people as possible. This is good for Facebook, but it may not be what the user wants. Unfortunately, users have a tendency to stick with the defaults that are given. The average user tends to just accept the defaults, or perhaps not even check the defaults. This means that a person may end up sharing more than they want with more people than they want. This is a problematic issue, perhaps. So, why is this important in terms of design? Well, what I'm essentially saying is that as a designer, you are partly involved in designing a good life for somebody else. You are trying to do ethics for your users and perhaps for other people. This is because technology is designed. In a way, you design an idea of good into the technology that you design yourselves. For example, if we look at this item here, this is a paper cup. This essentially says, throw me away. So what you're doing is you're designing the thing so that it suggests to the user what they need to do after they've used it. It doesn't say to them, wash me and use me again. It says, use me and throw me away. This designed idea of good into the artifact means that you are encouraging people to act in a less environmentally friendly way. It seems perfectly possible that you could design vending machines to use other types of cups that can be perhaps washed and reused. So essentially what you're doing is you're designing an idea of good into a product that you're designing. So by doing this, you're doing ethics for other people. The question is whose idea of good should we be using? Should we be using the designer's idea of good, the user's idea of good, the client's idea of good, or perhaps the government's idea of good? This is not a clear question, and it means that designers maybe need to think a little bit about ethics. So this brings me to the question, why is it important that designers think about ethics? And I would argue that this is because by trying to influence the behaviour of people, by doing what I would call behavioural design, we are having an effect on other people. We're making choices for autonomous users, and this is a serious matter. Autonomy, and I'll come back to this in a later lecture, is an important part of what it is to be human. So by making choices for other people, we're having an influence on their behaviour, and this is a serious matter. The second thing is actually, as designers, you don't just affect your user, you have an effect possibly on other people. You make choices for other people. We design for our users, but our users are part of a larger community that includes their friends, family. They're members of society, but they're also embodied in the world. So, for example, the vending machine cup that needs to be thrown away is actually making a choice for the whole world in an odd sort of way by suggesting that it's okay to throw things away after using them. Another reason that you can think about design ethics is less to do with ethics and maybe more to do with being a designer. As a designer, you're looking for inspiration. By looking from an ethical point of view, it can give you inspiration. It can give you new choices, new understandings of the problem that maybe lead you to create a better and more ethical solution to the problem you're trying to solve. The bad news, I'm afraid, is that ethical thinking doesn't give you answers, it gives you choices. And I'm afraid to say that those choices aren't always easy. Sometimes they're not very nice, sometimes they're bad, and sometimes they're horrible. The important thing here is, of course, at least if you've thought about it, you may be able to avoid the horrible choice, even if that means choosing something that's not perfect, but not quite as bad as it could have been if you hadn't done ethical thinking. And this is important because as designers, one of the key things you do is you make choices. Sometimes you do it consciously and sometimes you do it unconsciously, but you do make choices. And this leads me to my final reason why I think it's important for designers to think about ethics, is if you use ethical thinking, then at least you can explain your choices to yourselves, or also to other people. If you haven't thought about it, you may make ethical decisions without realizing it, and those decisions may be bad. And then the question is how will you feel about looking at yourself in the mirror once you've made those choices?